It's that time of year again, Spookaroos. That time when everyone is telling us to be holly and jolly. They've got a smile on their face and a song in their heart. Dreadful, isn't it? But there are those of us who remember the old ways. Some of us who remember that Christmas was traditionally the perfect time for ghost stories. And I'm going to tell you one tonight. Welcome to Spooky AS, Spooky As Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinnells, and no, I don't really hate Christmas. But it's not as fun as Halloween. In case you weren't here at this time last year, I was thinking about the song The Most Wonderful Time of the Year. I'm sure you've all heard that song a million times, but there's a line in that song that says, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago." And I always wondered, what do they mean, ghost stories? I mean, I know Charles Dickens and Christmas Carol, like there's ghosts in that, but I wouldn't really call it like a ghost story. And if it is, that's the only one that I know of, right? Well, turns out not right. In the Victorian days and up until the early 19th century, ghost stories were a traditional part of the Christmas celebration. You would tell ghost stories around the fire on Christmas Eve, because after all, it is the dead of winter. And, before we had climate change and everything, I'm old enough to remember when it used to actually snow and there would be snow on the ground in Boston. And you would tell these, well, I don't remember telling ghost stories by the fire, but I could see where that would be the perfect activity. The sun goes down early and it's dark, you're sitting by the fire. Ghost story time. So here at Spooky As Shit, we are bringing back that tradition. So, for the second year in a row, I'm going to read you a classic ghost story. And today's ghost story is probably pretty well known. You might have heard it before. It is called Smee. And it is by an English writer known as A.M.Burrage. Or Burrage? I'm not sure. I wonder how he pronounced that. Anyway, it's by him. Now, I chose this particular story because, I was looking through olden times ghost stories, and usually I would try to pick something a little bit more Victorian. This one actually comes from 1930, I believe. If it's not 1930 exactly, it's from the 1930s. But it focuses on a game called Smee. And the Smee in the game stands, that's like when you say it's me, but they say it quick, so it becomes Smee. And it's a game that people are going to play in the story. And it's basically like hide and go seek, but you're looking for the person who is Smee, or the person who is it. That's what they're known as. And then the story will explain the details of the game. But it reminded me of when I was real young, and we used to go to my grand aunt and uncle's houses for Christmas and other holidays. And I come from an Irish family, and Irish Catholics are known for their large families. My immediate family, there's only 4 siblings, but we did have a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles and all that. So when we got together, it was a big turnout, and they all lived in like these really big houses, and we would play games together, But I was always one of the youngest ones, if not the youngest. I'm the youngest in my family, and by a good number, the closest brother in age to me is 6 years older than I am. So I was kind of like the tag-along kid, But I do remember they would let me play with them sometimes, and I remember, although I can't exactly remember what game it was, I do remember that we were in the unfinished basement, which was creepy as fuck. This was like literally a dirt floor with some like slabs of concrete for some reason, and then some shelves in the basement. I think I was trying to look it up. I was trying to Google it to find out what game we would be playing, and I think the one that comes closest to it is a game called Dead Man. But in any event, here's what I actually remember. I was very, very young when this was happening. And to be honest with you, I'm not even 100% positive it was Christmas. It might have been Easter. Who knows? But in any event, I remember being in this unfinished basement. I remember the older kids inviting me to play. I remember them putting the blindfold on me. I remember that I could actually see through the blindfold pretty well. because they didn't tie it on quite right. But I didn't want to tell them, A, because I wanted to win the game, and B, because I was pretty afraid being down in this unfinished basement with all the older kids. But I also remember it wasn't very well lit down there. It was a basement, so it was kind of dark, and there's a lot of shadows cast and all that. And I do remember looking, cheating, looking through the blindfold and seeing my older cousins contorting themselves so they could get up on the shelves and then staying in this, awkward position. And I just remember it being really scary. And I don't think I voiced it because I knew it wasn't supposed to be scary. And the point of Dead Man is that people hide and then the person is blindfolded and they have to clap, or I think we probably snapped 3 times to kind of lead them, and then they had to find somebody and try to tag them before they reached the base. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But in any event, it was creepy. And so when I read a synopsis of this story and then reread this story, Smee, it reminded me of my own family gatherings and those games we used to play. So that is why I selected this story for this year. Before I begin the story, I do want to take a moment to ask you to please check out the websites Spookyas.ocm or Spookyas.ocm. They both take you to the exact same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can find links to all of our social media. We are at SpookyAsShit on both Twitter and Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/SpookyAS. You can also find previous episodes and pictures and videos and all that kind of good stuff. And by the way, I've said before that I'm not very good at Twitter, and apparently I'm really not good at it because I checked on the Twitter account just last night and noticed that I actually had a bunch of stuff that I hadn't replied to. I'm not getting notifications. I used to get, notifications on my phone. I don't know. I must have switched them by accident, or maybe there was some policy change and I don't know. In any event, I'm getting notifications when celebrities post something or if someone's thing was in the news, but I'm not getting notifications when someone, posts something about the show or tags me or whatever. So I apologize if it took me a while to get back to you, but hopefully I think I got back to everybody and liked everything that I needed to like, and I certainly do appreciate anyone sharing the show on Twitter or anywhere else for that matter. So if I'm late in thanking you, please don't take that personal. I'm just not good at all the social medias. I'm kind of a hermit. I literally used to live alone in the woods. Not in a house in the woods. I used to live in the woods. So pardon me for being a little bit behind on all these things. Now, let us begin our Christmas ghost story, Smee. No, said Jackson with a smile. I'm sorry. I don't want to upset your game, but I'm not playing any games of hide and seek. It was Christmas Eve, and we were a party of 14. We had dined well. It was a season for childish games, and we were all in the mood for playing them. Well, all except Jackson, that is. When somebody suggested hide and seek, there was rapturous and almost unanimous approval. His was the one dissonant voice. It was not like Jackson to spoil our sport or to refuse to do as the others wanted. Somebody asked him if he were feeling seedy. No, he said. I feel perfectly fit, thanks. But, he added with a smile which softened without retracting the flat refusal, I'm not playing hide and seek. Why not? Someone asked. He hesitated a moment before replying. Sometimes I go and stay at a house where a girl was killed. She was playing hide and seek in the dark. She didn't know the house very well. There was a door that led to the servants' staircase. When she was chased, she thought the door led to a bedroom. She opened the door and jumped, and landed on the bottom of the stairs. She broke her neck, of course. We all looked serious. Mrs. Fernley said, How terrible! And were you there when it happened? Jackson shook his head sadly. "No," he said. "But I was there when something else happened. Something worse." "What could be worse than that?" "This was," said Jackson. He hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "I wonder if any of you have ever played a game called Smee. It's much better than hide and seek. The name comes from It's Me, of course. Perhaps you'd like to play it instead of hide and seek. Let me tell you the rules of the game. Every player is given a sheet of paper. All the sheets except one are blank. On the last sheet of paper is written Smee. Nobody knows who Smee is except Smee himself or herself. You turn out the lights, and Smee goes quietly out of the room and hides. After a time, the others go off and search for Smee. But of course, they don't know who they are looking for. When one player meets another, he challenges him by saying, 'Smee?' and the other player answers, 'Smee,' and they continue searching. But the real Smee does not answer when someone challenges. The second player stays quietly beside him. Presently, they will be discovered by a third player. He will challenge, and receiving no answer, he will join the first two. This goes on until all the players are in the same place. The last one to find Smee has to pay a forfeit. It's a good, noisy, amusing game. In a big house, it often takes a long time until everyone has found Smee. Perhaps you'd like to try it. I'll happily pay you my forfeit and sit here by the fire while you play." "It sounds a good game," I remarked. "Have you played it too, Jackson?" "Yes," he answered. "I played it in the house I was telling you about." "And she was there? The girl who broke—" No, someone else said. "He told us already he wasn't there when she broke her neck." Jackson thought for a moment. "I don't know if she was there or not." "I'm afraid she was. I know there were 13 of us playing the game, and there were only 12 people in the house." I didn't know the dead girl's name. When I heard that whispered name in the dark, it didn't worry me. But I'll tell you, I'm never going to play that kind of game again. It made me quite nervous for a long time. I prefer to pay my forfeit at once. We all stared at him. His words did not make sense at all. Tim Vouse was the kindest man in the world. He smiled at us all. "This sounds like an interesting story," he said. "Come on, Jackson. You can tell it instead of paying your forfeit." "Very well," said Jackson. And here is his story. Have you met the Sangstons? They are cousins of mine, and they live in Surrey. 5 years ago, they invited me to go and spend Christmas with them. It was an old house, with lots of unnecessary passages and staircases. A stranger could easily get lost. Well, I went down for that Christmas. Violet Sangston promised me that I knew most of the other guests. Unfortunately, I couldn't get away from my job until Christmas Eve. All the other guests had arrived there on the previous day. I was the last to arrive, and I was only just in time for dinner. I said hello to everyone I knew, and Violet Sangston introduced me to the people I did not know. Then it was time to go into dinner. That is perhaps why I didn't hear the name of the tall, dark-haired, handsome girl who I had not met before. Everyone was in rather a hurry, and I'm always bad at catching people's names anyway. She looked cold and clever. She didn't look at all friendly. But she looked interesting, and I wondered who she was. I didn't ask, because I was sure that someone would speak to her by name during the meal. Unluckily, however, I was a long way from her at the table. I was sitting next to Mrs. Gorman, and as usual, Mrs. Gorman was being very bright and amusing. Her conversation is always worth listening to, and I completely forgot to ask the name of the dark, proud girl. There were 12 of us, including the Sangstons themselves. We were all young, or trying to be young. Jack and Violet Sangston were the oldest, and their 17-year-old son Reggie was the youngest. It was Reggie who suggested Smee when talked to into games. He told us the rules of the games, just as I had described them to you. Jack Sangston warned us all. If you're going to play games in the dark, he said, please be careful of the back stairs on the first floor. A door leads to them, and I've often thought about taking that door off. In the dark, a stranger to the house could think that they were walking into a room. A girl really did break her neck on those stairs. I asked him how it happened. It was about 10 years ago, before we came here. There was a party, and they were playing hide-and-seek. This girl was looking for somewhere to hide. She heard somebody coming and ran along the passage to get away. She opened the door, thinking it led to a bedroom. She planned to hide there until the seeker had gone. Unfortunately, it was the door that led to the back stairs. She fell straight down to the bottom of the stairs. She was dead when they picked her up. We all promised to be careful, and Mrs. Gorman even made a little joke about living to be 90. You see, none of us had known the poor girl, and we did not want to feel sad on Christmas Eve. Well, we all started the game immediately after dinner. Young Reggie Sangston went around making sure all the lights were off, except for the ones in the servants' rooms and in the sitting rooms where we were. We then prepared 12 sheets of paper. 11 of them were blank, and one of them had Smee written on it. Reggie mixed them all up, and then we each took one. The person who got the paper with Smee on it had to hide. I looked at mine and saw that it was blank. A moment later, all the lights went out. In the darkness, I heard someone moving very quietly to the door. After a minute, somebody blew a whistle, and we all rushed to the door. I had no idea who was Smee. For 5 or 10 minutes we were all rushing up and down the passages, in and out of rooms, challenging each other and answering, "Smee! Smee!" After a while, the noise died down, and I guessed that someone had found Smee. After a time I found a group of people all sitting on the same narrow stairs. I challenged, and received no answer. So Smee was there. I hurriedly joined the group. Presently 2 more players arrived. Each one was hurrying to avoid being last. Jack Sangston was last, and he was given a forfeit. "I think we're all here now, aren't we?" he remarked. He lit a match, looked up the staircase, and began to count. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, he said, and then he laughed. "That's silly. There's one too many." The match went out. He lit another and again began to count. He got as far as 12, and then he looked puzzled. "There are 13 people here," he said. "I haven't counted myself yet." "Oh, nonsense," I laughed. "You probably began with yourself, and now you want to count yourself twice." His son took out his electric torch. It gave a better light than the matches, and we all began to count. Of course, there were 12 of us. Jack laughed. "Well," he said, "I'm sure I counted 13 twice." From halfway up the stairs, Violet Sangston spoke nervously. "I thought there was somebody sitting 2 steps above me. Have you moved, Captain Ransom?" The captain said that he hadn't. "But I thought there was somebody sitting between me and Mrs. Sangston." Just for a moment there was an uncomfortable something in the air. A cold finger seemed to touch us all. For that moment we all felt something odd and unpleasant had just happened, and was likely to happen again. Then we all laughed at ourselves, and at each other, and we felt normal again. There were only 12 of us, and that was that. Still laughing, we marched back to the sitting room, and began again. This time, I was Smee. Violet Sangston found me while I was searching for a hiding place. That game didn't last long. Soon there were 12 people, and the game was over. Violet felt cold, and wanted her jacket. Her husband went up to her bedroom to fetch it. As soon as he'd gone, Reggie touched me on the arm. He was looking pale and sick. "Quick," he whispered. "I've got to talk to you. Something terrible has happened." We went into the breakfast room. "What's the matter?" I asked. "I don't know. You were Smee last time, weren't you? Well, of course I didn't know who Smee was. While Mother and the others ran to the west side of the house and found you, I went east. There's a deep clothing cupboard in my bedroom. It looked like a good hiding place, and I thought that perhaps Smee might be in there. I opened the door in the dark and touched somebody's hand. 'Smee?' I whispered. And there was no answer. I thought I'd found Smee. Well, I don't understand it, but I suddenly had a strange, cold feeling. I can't describe it, but I felt like something was wrong. So I turned on my electric torch, and there was nobody there. Now, I'm sure I'd touched a hand, and nobody could get out of the cupboard because I was standing in the doorway. What do you think? You imagined you touched a hand, I said. He gave a short laugh. I knew you would say that. Of course I imagined it. That's the only explanation, isn't it? I agreed with him. I could see that he still felt shaken. Together we returned to the sitting room for another game of Smee. The others were all ready and waiting to start again. Perhaps it was my imagination, although I'm almost sure that it was not. But I had a feeling that nobody was really enjoying the game anymore. But everyone was too polite to mention it. All the same, I had the feeling that something was wrong. All the fun had gone out of the game. Something deep inside me was trying to warn me. Take care, it whispered. Take care. There was some unnatural, unhealthy influence at work in the house. Why did I have this feeling? Because Jack Sankton had counted 13 people instead of 12? Because his son imagined he had touched someone's hand in an empty cupboard? I tried to laugh to myself, but I did not succeed. Well, we started again. While we were all chasing the unknown Smee, we were all as noisy as ever. But it seemed to me that most of us were just acting. We were no longer enjoying the game. At first I stayed with the others, but for several minutes no Smee was found. I left the main group and started searching the first floor on the west side of the house, and there, while I was feeling along my way, I bumped into a pair of human knees. I put out my hand to touch a soft, heavy curtain. Then I knew where I was. There were tall, deep windows with window seats at the end of this passage. The curtains reached to the ground. Somebody was sitting in the corner of one of these window seats, behind a curtain. Aha, I thought. I've caught Smee. So I pulled the curtain to one side and touched a woman's arm. It was a dark, moonless night outside. I couldn't see the woman sitting in the corner of the window seat. Smee? I whispered. There was no answer. When Smee is challenged, he or she does not answer. So I sat down beside her to wait for the others. Then I whispered, What's your name? And out of the darkness beside me, the whisper came, Brenda Ford. I did not know the name, but I guessed at once who she was. I knew every girl in the house by name except one, and that was the tall, pale, dark girl. So here she was, sitting beside me on the window seat, shut in between the heavy curtains and the window. I was beginning to enjoy the game again. I wondered if she was enjoying it too. I whispered one or two other rather ordinary questions to her, and received no answer. Smee is a game of silence. It is a rule of a game that Smee and the person who have found Smee are to keep quiet. This, of course, makes it harder for the others to find them. But there was nobody else around. I wondered, therefore, why she was insisting on silence. I spoke again and got no answer. I began to feel a little annoyed. Perhaps she is one of those cold, clever girls who have a poor opinion of all men, I thought. She doesn't like me, and she is using the rules of the game as an excuse to not speak. Well, if she doesn't like sitting here with me, I certainly don't want to sit with her. I turned away from her. I hope someone finds us soon, I thought. As I sat there, I realized that I disliked sitting beside this girl very much indeed. That was strange. The girl I had seen at dinner had seemed likable in a cold kind of way. I noticed her and wanted to know more about her. But now I felt really uncomfortable beside her. The feeling of something wrong, something unnatural, was growing. I remember touching her arm, and I trembled with horror. I wanted to jump up and run away. I prayed that someone else would come along soon. Just then I heard light footsteps in the passage. Somebody on the other side of the curtain brushed against my knees. The curtain moved to one side, and a woman's hand touched my shoulder. "Smee?" she whispered in a voice that I recognized at once. It was Mrs. Gorman. Of course, she received no answer. She came and sat down beside me at once, and I felt very much better. "It's Tony Jackson, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yes," I whispered back. "You're not Smee, are you?" "No. She's on my other side." She reached across me. I heard her fingernails scratch a woman's silk dress. "Hello, Smee. How are you? Who are you?" "Oh, it's against the rules to talk. Never mind. Tony will break the rules. Do you know, Tony, this game is beginning to annoy me a little. I hope that they aren't going to play it all evening. I'd like to play a nice quiet game, all together beside the warm fire." "Me too," I agreed. "Can't you suggest something to them? There's something rather unhealthy about this particular game. I'm sure I'm being very silly, but I can't get rid of the idea that we've got an extra player. Somebody who ought not be here at all." That was exactly how I felt, but I didn't say so. However, I felt very much better. Mrs. Gorman's arrival had chased away my fears. We sat talking. "I wonder when the others will find us," said Mrs. Gorman. After a time we heard the sound of feet, and young Reggie's voice shouting, "Hello, hello, is anybody there?" "Yes," I answered. "Is Mrs. Gorman with you?" "Yes." "What happened to you? You've both got forfeits. We've all been waiting for you for hours." "But you haven't found Smee yet," I complained. "You haven't, you mean? I was Smee this time." "But Smee is here with us," I cried. "Yes," agreed Mrs. Gorman. The curtain was pulled back, and we sat looking into the eye of Reggie's electric torch. I looked at Mrs. Gorman, and then on my other side, between me and the wall, was an empty place on the window seat. I stood up at once. Then I sat down again. I was feeling very sick, and the world seemed to be going round and round. There was somebody there," I insisted, "because I touched her." "So did I," said Mrs. Gorman in a trembling voice. "I don't think anyone could have left this window seat without us knowing." Reggie gave a shaky little laugh. I remembered his unpleasant experience earlier in the evening. "Someone's been playing jokes," he said. "Are you coming down?" We were not very popular when we came down to the sitting room. "I found the two of them sitting behind a curtain on a window seat," said Reggie. I went up to the tall, dark girl. "So, you pretended to be Smee and then ran away," I accused her. She shook her head. Afterwards we all played cards in the sitting room, and I was very glad. Some time later, Jack Sangston wanted to talk to me. I could see that he was rather cross with me, and he soon told me the reason. "Tony," he said, "I suppose you are in love with Mrs. Gorman. That's your business. But please don't make love to her in my house during a game. You've kept everyone waiting. It was very rude of you, and I'm ashamed of you." "But we were not alone," I protested. "There was somebody else, somebody who was pretending to be Smee. I believe it was that tall dark girl, Mrs. Ford. She whispered her name to me. Of course, she refused to admit it afterwards." Jack Sangston stared at me. Miss who?" he breathed. "Brenda Ford," she said. Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "Look here, Tony. I don't mind a joke, but enough is enough. We don't want to worry the ladies. Brenda Ford is the name of the girl who broke her neck on the stairs. She was playing hide-and-seek here 10 years ago." The end. How did you like that story, Spookaroos? I think we could all kind of see where it was going, but still, I find it a pleasant diversion anyway. Before we close up shop here, I would like to remind you once again to please visit the website Spookyas.com or Spookyasshit.com. Don't forget to find us on Twitter and Instagram at SpookyAsShit, and find us on Facebook at Facebook.com/SpookyAS. As always, if you could share the show with your friends, either by word of mouth or posting links or episodes or however you may end up sharing them, It would be truly, truly appreciated. And of course, so would 5-star reviews on iTunes or whatever other channel you may use to listen to this podcast. I hope that you all have a very Merry Christmas for those of you who celebrate. And for those of you who don't, have a good Monday. Until next time, don't be afraid.